Welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I'm your host, Jeff Barker. I am a screenwriter, and this is a podcast where we study and appreciate the standalone beauty of the screenplay as an independent literary piece, not just a blueprint for the film. We deconstruct it, we find out what's unique, what's amazing about it, and we discover all that we can learn from the screenplay. This week we will be breaking down A Real Pain by Jesse Eisenberg. It is an Academy Award nominated screenplay. It's a funny and heartbreaking look at self-discovery through the pain of grief, and it's also a smart and fair look at mental health. It's nominated for 2 Academy Awards, not only Best Screenplay, that's what we're most interested in, but also Best Supporting Actor, which is Kieran Culkin, who does a tremendous job in this film. But let's talk about the author of the screenplay and the director of the movie, Jesse Eisenberg. Academy Award nominated actor for playing Mark Zuckerberg in Aaron Sorkin's brilliant film, The Social Network. He's known for playing these brainy, troubled characters. Grew up in New Jersey. His mother was a performer and an artist. His father was a taxi driver. But his first love was writing. We're learning a lot about Jesse Eisenberg over the last couple of weeks because he's on his press junket for the movie and the Academy Awards. And he's so likable. He's on every show. I mean, you just turn on the TV or turn on your podcast, and there he is. He first started writing short stories when he was a kid. I love that. I write short stories. And then he started writing screenplays as a teenager, and he was taken very seriously. He had representation as a teenager. In fact, he wrote a play about Woody Allen that was, I guess, so disturbing that he received a cease and desist letter. And what makes it even funnier is that he went on later in life to be in 2 Woody Allen films. He wrote and directed his first feature in 2022. It's called When You Finish Saving the World. It's about a complex mother-son relationship. And this showed his talent for writing complex interpersonal relationships with emotional depth. An established actor, but he decided to stay behind the camera for his first feature film and focus on the directing, which I can appreciate. My son, who's also an actor and a director, just finished his first big feature film. And he also decided to stay behind the camera and focus on the directing because there's so much to do, so much to learn, especially that first go-around. But he steps back in front of the camera as the actor and director for his second feature film, which is the one we're talking about today, A Real Pain. Let's talk about how it was developed. It started in 2017 as one of his old short stories called Mongolia, about 2 college friends abroad. And he explained to John August on Script Notes, the podcast, love that podcast, that he had a difficult time getting past the second act, trying to figure out how to tie it all together, until he was working on his computer and he saw a pop-up ad for an Auschwitz tour with lunch. And that was it. He was off to the races. He had the idea. At first, the 2 main characters were brothers, but he wanted some separation between them and for them to not seem so obligated in their relationship. And when he decided to make them cousins, that is when it really clicked. Eisenberg really wanted Kieran Culkin to be in this film. He says he was thinking about him some when he was writing it. They're friends from way back. Culkin, though, was hesitant since he's not Jewish. And it took a lot of convincing. In fact, Emma Stone, who's one of the producers on the film, is the one that he credits to finally convincing him to do it. It's always important to know the production companies that are involved in this business, to know which companies do what. Jesse Eisenberg's company, obviously off the jump, that's Rego Park. And then Tropic Studios got involved. They do serious, thought-provoking productions, so you can see why they were interested in this film. Then Fruit Tree, that is Emma Stone's company, along with David McCary and Ollie Harding. And Extreme Emotions, that is a Polish company. They got involved on set, on location there. And they have some sizzle right now. You may know them from last year with Zone of Interest. It was shot in Poland over about 2 months for a budget of, you ready for this? $3 million. This film is about to make a lot of money. Searchlight, they're the ones distributing the film. And it went to Sundance in 2024, last year, and won Best Screenplay then. So we can't wait to dig into this story with you. And here we go. A Real Pain by Jesse Eisenberg. Here is the official logline. Mismatched cousins reunite for a tour through Poland to honor their beloved grandmother, but their old tensions resurface against the backdrop of their family history. And here's my go at it. A journey to honor their grandmother's legacy turns into an emotional battleground as two cousins clash over grief, identity, and the weight of history. And we like to start with the title. And over the last several weeks, I've been trying to dig as deep as I can into these titles. And when you do, you discover they go pretty deep. So let's look at this one. I see 4 meanings to the title, A Real Pain. The most obvious one, the one you can derive from the movie poster and the one that's putting booties in the seats, is Benji. He is a real pain. He's charming. He's full of love. He's difficult. He's annoying. He's selfless. He's self-centered. And at the same time, he's just very conflicted. His mood is unpredictable and he has no filter. He is a real pain. Number 2, a real pain is an emotional pain. The film explores grief, family relationships, and then deep emotional trauma. Most people probably have those too, but I think we can go deeper. We can go to the 3rd level, and that is generational or historical pain. True recent ancestral suffering that comes to life with the main characters as they spend time in Poland, where 2 generations ago, most of their relatives were murdered. And we can go one more. We can go down to that 4th level. And I believe that the 4th meaning of the screenplay is existential pain. Benji and Dave is Eisenberg's character, they begin to question all of it. What does it mean? How could we ever be happy if there's this much pain and trauma in the world? There's a lot of philosophical questions asked in the screenplay. All of these screenplays are a gift to be able to not just read them, but study them so deeply. There's so much to learn. And now it's time to learn from this one. Jesse Eisenberg goes with standard formatting. No bolds, no underlines, no extra lines, no frazzle-dazzle, no funny business. The page is clean, surgical. It looks like something from film school. And it's a quick read. 100 pages, a lot of white space, easy to get through it. You could sit down and just like that, read this screenplay. One thumbprint that I see from Jesse Eisenberg is the M dash. He uses that a lot, which I think is interesting. He interrupts himself in the screenplay quite a bit with the dash, which is pretty standard. But he talks that way. If you watch him on TV with interviews, it's a lot of start and stop to himself. So he has his own voice on the page, which I think is beautiful. Another thing that I noticed is that he uses double spaces at the end of each sentence. You know, like the old typewriter, the space bar. He and my wife are the only 2 people I know who do this. She does it in text messages. And I always pick on her about it. But this, to me, at first, he jumped off the page and it was a little distracting because I wasn't used to it. But I have to say, about a third of the way through the screenplay, I really liked it. It felt like it gave the text a little chance to breathe, especially in the dialogue boxes. I could imagine as an actor, it would be something that you'd appreciate to be able to see clearly how the lines separate. He uses later quite a bit to signify a progression of the scene rather than doing a whole new slug line. Rather than doing a montage, he just gets through it quickly. Later, one line, later. Here's an example on page 910. You can see David is on his phone. David digs out his pills. The plane lands. It's later. It takes you through the scenes. We always like to look at direction on the page since it is such a hot topic. Do you do it? Do you not do it? He is the director of the film, so of course he can do it. But even as a spec writer or an assignment writer, you can put it in there. But let's look at what he does. Even on page 1, right away, we get a lot of we's. There's 3 of them on the first page. We zoom, we get, we arrive. So he's really putting us as the reader in the position of the camera. Throughout the screenplay, we see it. There's 25 total, so there's a lot, but not like an absurd amount. We see, we move, we get to, we pan, we zoom, we push. Those are some that we see in the screenplay. Also, we see shot several times, like close shot of each person, montage shot. That's in there quite a bit. But really, it's, again, pretty standard. And before we get going on the writing, I just want to identify the special sauce that made this script an Oscar-nominated screenplay. I figured it out. Before becoming a full-time writer, I spent more than a decade in the field of psychiatry as a medical provider. And this screenplay resonates with me about mental health. It always bothers me when I watch a film and they get the mental health aspect wrong. And it happens a lot. It's very well intentioned, but in many cases, it does more harm than good if you don't really know what you're talking about. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, rarely depicted accurately, though it does happen. And don't even get me started on dissociative identity disorder, or what people would say is multiple personality disorder. Not at all as it is depicted on the screen. But I believe this is an Oscar-nominated screenplay because of its accurate depiction of personality pathology secondary to trauma. As a reader of this screenplay or a viewer of the film, you don't have to understand textbook psychology to know the characters ring true. And the truth is what makes us fall in love with the story. When it happens, it's magical. It happened for us last year with the film Past Lives, if you'll think back to that one. Benji displays authentic cluster B personality traits. And these are cemented ways of identifying with the self and the world and how we interact with the world based on a history of abuse, neglect, abandonment. They're predictable, they're obvious, they're apparent. Doesn't mean that if you experienced abuse, neglect, or abandonment, you have cluster B traits. But if you have cluster B traits, you most likely experienced abuse, trauma, abandonment. So we don't know what happened to Benji. I can guess, but we have no idea. All we know is what's on the page, and he certainly displays these traits. And let's talk about them. The first is rapidly shifting and intense moods based on circumstance. We see Benji quickly flipping his mood, not based on some overarching neurochemical response, but because of what is happening around him and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. The next is fragmented identity. This is the chameleon effect. Benji has developed a common coping mechanism of being highly skilled at taking on different personas. In other words, he can almost be any person in any setting, and this is how he's able to be so charming and so engaging. This is a valuable interpersonal skill, but often it leads the person down the path of feeling empty, alone, losing touch with the core of who they really are. Here's an example of Benji using this skill when he first meets the tour group.
I'm just interested in people from other places. It's like I'm a fan, basically. Keep going, dude. I'm sorry about that.
No. I'm very happy when people are interested in my country.
Oh, sweet.
What's your name?
Benji.
Benji? I'm an open book.
Oh, rad.
So my mother and I survived the genocide, and I moved to Winnipeg with her life savings sewn into the inside of my jacket.
Jesus, fuck.
And in Winnipeg, I found a connection there with the Jewish community.
Yeah, well, naturally.
Yes, naturally, Benji. And when I learned about the Jewish story...
This is why Benji loves the airport. He gets to experience what he believes is the best version of himself by interacting with strangers and taking on a temporary persona of who he believes they want him to be. So it's like a little game. He gets to shift and be a different person for a few minutes. There are 9 of these traits, but I'm only going to mention 3. Here's the third one, impulsivity. Cluster B traits include broad impulsivity. There's also narrow impulsivity, which is like ADHD, where you're making decisions based on very narrow information because of being hyper-focused. But broad impulsivity is when you're very aware of the consequences of what your actions will have, but you don't care. You're doing it anyway. In the moment, it's all that matters. We see this impulsivity when he coordinates with the group for this irreverent display at the statues. We see it when he sneaks the 2 of them on top of the roof of a random hotel they're not even staying at. We see it when he's playing in the river and everybody has to wait on him to stop playing so they can go on. We see it when he goes off on the tour guide. We see it when he goes off on the people on the train. All very impulsive. Okay, so the point here is that Jesse Eisenberg, he knew what he was doing when he wrote this script. He has given us one of these rare moments when we identify something in literature or film that we know to be true in real life because of our own interactions and experiences, but we don't know that we know it to be true. Does that make sense? It sort of sneaks up on us, but it's so very authentic and true that we're like, yes, it moves us. That is magic. I'm going to pause right here for just a second and say if you're enjoying this so far, I am so very grateful. Please don't forget to subscribe and comment, leave a review. You can listen to the podcast or you can watch it on YouTube. I update regularly on all the socials. And please subscribe to my Substack if you're interested in getting an even deeper dive into this screenplay and others. All right, now back to the program.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.
Now to the actual writing, and Eisenberg is sparse and a minimalist when it comes to writing. He doesn't write with emotion or bubbly prose. He doesn't write in those short, clippy phrases that are popular in screenplays. He writes in complete sentences that get very to the point. He specializes in character development through dialogue and the psychology of that character, like we just talked about. Because the writing is so lean, he tells us directly what the characters are feeling or what we should be paying attention to in the scene. The rest of it he leaves up to the reader's imagination, or if you've seen the film, he's left it up to himself and the DP to bring it all to life. And you may say, well, he's the director. He doesn't need to put all that on the page. But the truth is, most writer-directors are actually more descriptive because they want to make sure everyone's on the same page and everyone sees their vision before it even gets started. But not Jesse. Let's look at page 79 here. After the concentration camp, they're going back to the hotel, and the action line is, the group walks toward the entrance. That's it. There's another one here. The group enters the lobby. The group gathers around James in the lobby. The group nods. Very basic, to the point. He also has very minimal descriptions of characters, sometimes none. In fact, our two main characters have really no description. Look here, right off the jump, page 1, Benji, his character introduction is, this is Benji Kaplan. He has an absent look on his face that borders on melancholy. Nothing about his age, nothing about, the way he looks or, any characteristics. And that's fine, but it is worth pointing out. Also, the other main character, David. Here's his introduction. In a Brooklyn Heights neighborhood, David hustles down the street. That's it. That's all it says. And only a couple of times does it ever mention anyone's age. I think the older couple, he mentions maybe that they're in their 60s. And then the translator, I know for sure, toward the end of the movie, the guy who's talking to his dad says that he is 20 years old. But other than that, I think that's it. And only a brief mention in the beginning that they're cousins. It sort of sneaks up on you. We've been with them for several minutes. And if you didn't already know from the premise, you might think that they're friends or estranged brothers. But then it says here on the bottom of page 4, it says, from behind, we see the two cousins walking towards security. That's it. Also, there's very minimal scene description. If you look at page 12 here, this is when they go to the hotel. And he describes the hotel by saying, they arrive at an upscale chain hotel. On page 92, we finally get to grandmother's house. This is the pinnacle of the journey, what we've been striving toward the whole screenplay. And he describes the house by saying, they approach a little alley that looks like it hasn't changed in 100 years. David points to a little address above the door, 25. It's actually good writing, but very minimal. Page 42, the train station, he describes it this way. The group walks through the train station. On page 38, they're up on top of a hotel looking out over Warsaw at night. Many people would begin to have lots of descriptions about what that looks like. He does not. He says, the boys are at the edge of the roof, which overlooks Warsaw. It is gorgeous. And he is a funny dude. There's a lot of comedy on the page. He's very good at writing comedy. In fact, when he was younger, that's all he wanted to do. He was obsessed with writing raunchy comedy. He loved Adam Sandler, wanted to write like that. He also loved SNL. He could write for Adam Sandler today for sure, since Mr. Sandler is now doing smart, character-driven comics himself, except for Happy Gilmore 2 that's coming out, I think, this year. We'll look at a couple of those funny scenes. Here is on page 7. And it's when they're on the airplane and they find out that they have the middle seat and the window seat. And actually, David has the window seat and Benji right away was like, do you mind sitting in the middle? Like, almost like it's a good thing. He's manipulating him to sit in the middle. And then he comes back later and he's like, how are you doing in there? And Dave's like, it's a little tight. Also on the plane, as they're settling in, Benji is making fun of Dave because he just found out that he sells pop-up ads, which I think is a nod to his idea for the screenplay. I think that's pretty cool. And while he is trying to justify it, Dave to Benji, about these cool startups and all these guys, Benji, it's like, hey, they're doing the demonstration. You've all been on a plane. You know how awkward that is when their flight attendants looking at you. Benji's is like, he's like, they deserve respect and attention. It's very funny. Our main characters, when they're together in the screenplay, are referred to as the boys, which I think is simple and beautiful, and it's inclusive, and it makes them seem like a unit. It's used a lot, 48 times in the screenplay. You see on 96, 6 times on this page, the boys, the boys, the boys. The music is also interesting in this screenplay. He weaves Chopin's nocturnes throughout. And because of this, I learned more about him. I didn't realize he was a composer from Poland. I knew he was just an old guy who had classic music. This was around the 1830s. And he uses it to tie the scenes together in a brilliant way, actually. You see on 58 what I'm talking about. Nocturne, Opus 9. But there's 7 different ones played 8 times in the screenplay. It's done so frequently that he actually points it out a different time when he didn't use it. On page 64, Benji plays on the piano and it says, it's a piano, but for the first time, it's not Chopin. There's a lot of conflict in this screenplay, which really is the engine of the screenplay. A lot of tension, high stakes, emotionally, interpersonally. There's a great example on page 61 where Benji is irritated because James, the tour guide, is talking at the cemetery, and you can see him getting amped up. And this is, again, one of these personality traits where he has the rapidly shifting and intense mood based on circumstance. He also goes into push-pull mode. He pushes really hard on the tour guide, James, and then realizes he pushed him too far and he doesn't want to lose him, so he grabs that back on and pulls back. Push-pull relationship. There is some imagery and symbolism in the screenplay. The opening and closing scenes mirror each other. It's the second week in a row that our screenplays bookend those scenes. It's not uncommon. The way The Substance did it, though, is just truly unique. Here, though, it is very clear when we get to the end of the screenplay, okay, they're tying this to the beginning. It's also clear here at the airport that Benji has not grown much, if at all, as a character. He may temporarily feel more love, but it fades, and it will always fade. And when David invites him to his home at the end of the screenplay, Benji declines. He's comfortable in his isolation. And that is when it becomes obvious to us that David was, in fact, the main protagonist because Benji was the catalyst. And because of Benji, David grew. He completed his arc. Benji did not. Another bit of symbolism is the cemetery. David is riding from the airport back to his house in New York. He's in his city. And he looks out the window and there's a Jewish cemetery. And this, to me, is the most beautiful line in the screenplay that's not dialogue. On page 99, it says, all this Jewish history right next door, upward mobility and death, the cycle. David takes it all in, a part of it all. So I thought that was very good. Speaking of dialogue, I mean, this is where Eisenberg really shines. This is where he does his work. On page 70, this is one of the most important monologues of the screenplay. David gives us some insight into why he is so frustrated with Benji. Someone asked him if he's okay, and he says, I'm not. That's the thing. I have stuff going on. I do. I take pills for my OCD. I jog. I meditate. I go to work. I come home at the end of the day. I move forward because I know my pain is unexceptional, so I don't feel the need to burden anybody with it. The monologue is so great that you have to see it. Here is the clip from the Academy.
I mean, who isn't rot?
Well, you seem okay.
I'm not, though. I'm not. I just, take a pill for my fucking OCD, and I jog, and I meditate, and I go to work in the morning, and I, come home at the end of the day, and I, move forward, because I know that my pain is unexceptional, so I don't feel the need to, burden everybody with it,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. God, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right, David.
I'm sorry, I'm ranting. I am just, I don't know. Ooh, sorry, I'm just so exhausted by him sometimes, I love him, and I hate him, and I want to kill him, and I want to be him, you know, and I feel like so stupid around him, you know, because he is so cool and he just does not give a shit. And then just like being here with him is just so baffling to me, you know? It's just baffling because it's like, how did this guy come from the survivors of this place, you know? I mean, that your uncle had to sell like used furniture to rich assholes, or like couldn't get into medical school, and that you survived like the worst thing to happen on this planet in the last 30 years, and that our grandma survived by 1,000 miracles when the entire world was trying to kill her, you know? And I look at him and I just like want to ask him. I just want to ask him, and I just can't. Like how did the product of 1,000 miracles overdose on a bottle of sleeping pills?
Also, several times in the screenplay, he calls for ad-libbing. Here's an example on page 80. Says that the group ad-libs goodbyes to Benji and David. So I think as an actor himself, he appreciates being able to be in character and bring something unique to the screenplay. And so he is giving his actors the freedom to be able to do that. So several times he asks for them to ad-lib. And it really pays off because one of the most memorable lines in the movie is an ad-lib by Culkin. And it is from a part in the screenplay where he says to ad-lib. Culkin runs up to Jennifer Grey, that Jennifer Grey. She's one of the tour participants. And he says to her, "You're walking alone? What are you, a loser or something?" And it's really funny. It really hits. Now for some of the narrative elements, and we'll start with tone. It has a melancholic tone, deep sense of trauma and loss, both personally and historically. The main characters are in grief for losing their grandmother, and they each have their own issues, like we've been talking about. And they feel unheard and unseen. Another is introspective. David and Benji undergo self-examination and question their identity as with themselves and their family. And the third tone I like is dry humor, because the humor is very underlying, but if you're paying attention, it is funny. And it's delivered in such a way to help deal with the emotional weight of the story. Without it, it would be unbearable. And I've identified some themes. One is inherited trauma, how the past lingers in the present, how the Holocaust still shapes emotions and identity today in our own worlds, generations later. Another theme is coping mechanisms. David and Benji each have different tools to deal with their grief and their personal issues. David uses introspective anxiety, which we see quite a bit in the screenplay. Benji uses humor and self-destruction. Also, family bonds is a theme, how family relationships are a source of deep connection, but also pain. In other words, we usually hurt the ones that we love the most. The internal conflict of the screenplay, there are several. I'll just talk about a few. David's anxiety and his self-doubt. He's constantly overthinking, overanalyzing with life, with himself. Also, Benji's shifting identity, like we talked about. He buries his deep sadness by overcompensating with a larger-than-life persona that leads to personal disconnection, thus the mood dysregulation, the destructive behavior. Also, fear of being meaningless. That's the existential conflict that the characters keep working through. How do we honor the past and still live in the present? That's the question that they're asking themselves. External conflict, there's a lot. There's David versus Benji. That's the main one. You have clashing personalities that create this friction. You have the neurotic and cautious versus the reckless and the volatile. Benji versus the tour group. Benji disrupts the group with both irreverence and humor and anger. He'll try anything to derail this tour if it means he doesn't have to deal with his own emotions. And that leads us to Benji versus himself, which again sounds like internal conflict, but hear me out. The danger here is being a danger to himself, which is talked about in the screenplay. I thought it'd be interesting to look at the different narrative styles because it's kind of hard to put this screenplay into a box. So there are several. One is the narrative style of unresolved conflict. Unlike most stories, there is no real resolution here between the characters. And that is common with pure character-driven stories. You see it a lot in literature. In fact, if this were a piece of literature, it would be literary fiction. It wouldn't be genre fiction. Another is road trip narrative. This is a road trip film and screenplay, physical and psychological journey. Think about Little Miss Sunshine. That's a good example. Another narrative style is the dual protagonist. I mean, we have two perspectives instead of one. And in the end, one character grows and completes his arc and the other one doesn't. Also, we have tragicomic, which is a tragedy and a comic put together. It is really hard to pull that off, but when you do, it is really great. Think about Parasite was one like that. Silver Linings Playbook is another one. And then finally, structure. It can fit into several structure profiles, but we'll just put it into the 3-act structure. Act 1, the characters are established. David is anxious and overly cautious. Benji is reckless and charismatic. Their relationship is tense but affectionate, setting up the emotional core of the screenplay. The inciting incident is obviously they go on a road trip to Poland to learn about their family's history and their grandmother. And then Act 2 is the rising action. Tension is building through the tour's emotional weight. Benji's acting out to protect his ego. And at the same time, David puts up a wall to disconnect from any sort of feelings that he may be having as well. And then the midpoint crisis, which is the conflict, Benji versus David, Benji versus the group, Benji versus himself. And that takes us to Act 3, which is the climax, the moment of reckoning when David processes whether he wants to help Benji or detach from him, pull back away. And the resolution here is that David has a new understanding of himself because of Benji, but the trauma remains unresolved, the personal trauma, the family trauma, the cultural trauma, and Benji remains unchanged. And now that we have deconstructed the screenplay, let's get a flavor of what it looks like from a cinematic profile.
We get high in backseats of cars.
Davers and I are cousins. We used to be joined at the hip. Our grandma was from here, so Dave arranged for us to join this geriatric Polish tour with you fine people.
That's the way we get by.
I really needed this, man. I know that it's tough for you to leave your boy.
The way we get by.
I don't really have anything going on.
I know it's been a tough few months for you, so...
I also want to say that I know you're not the most comfortable person with people.
I'm not?
No. Does it look real?
Well, they're twice the size of you in metal, so...
You sure you don't want to come up here?
I'm good.
Can you take my picture?
That's what I'm talking about. Marcia!
Thank you, David.
But it's amazing that you're here, putting yourself out there so boldly for me.
Thank you, man.
Let's go smoke a joint.
Word of warning, this will be a tour about Penn.
Our grandmother and Benji were super close.
I mean, she was the coolest. I've just been in a real funk, I guess, since she died. Just haven't,
You're looking back at the horrors of your family history.
We completely cut ourselves off from anyone else's true pain.
Why are you doing this?
Oh man, you used to feel everything.
Obviously, there are triggers along the way.
We're not at the right station.
And you didn't wake me up.
Oh, you were having such a good nap, dude.
Jesus
you were like,
Christ, you're on a tour
sorry.
group with
Yeah, I know, I
people.
just didn't have the heart to wake you up.
Has he always been like this?
I love him, and I hate him,
What the flying jeez.
and I want to be him.
You used to cry about everything.
Yeah, it was awful. Who wants to cry about everything?
We're on a Holocaust tour. If now is not the time to grieve, I don't know what to tell you.
And that is A Real Pain by Jesse Eisenberg, and it was a real pleasure. But he has truly hit on some magic here where the reader is reminded of a truth that they knew to be true, but they didn't know that they knew to be true. If you can find that in your writing, you will have the special sauce. And now some call to actions. Please subscribe, comment, like, all that stuff. Find me on Substack where I do an even deeper dive into this screenplay and other screenplays. You can also find me on my website, jeff-barker.com, and all the social media sites. Please share this with your screenwriting friends. Please share this with your filmmaking friends. You can find this episode on all the podcast channels or watch on YouTube and see exactly what I'm talking about. And thank you for being with me, and I will see you next time right here on the Screenplay Lab.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.